"We have all decided you don't live here anymore," my mom said. My 4-year-old daughter was standing right there. I immediately stepped in front of Sophie, shielding her from the cold venom in my mother's eyes. I whispered for her to go to her playroom and grab her favorite doll, desperate to get her away from the wreckage of our family before the real battle began. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just picked up my phone and sent one text. "Have you ever been treated like a stranger by your own blood? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community." The air in the Savannah foyer was suffocating, thick with the scent of jasmine and a cruel, heavy Georgia humidity. But it was the coldness in my mother's eyes that truly froze the room. Sophie's small hand gripped mine, her tiny frame shaking, as the first tears fell. She didn't understand the legalities, but she could feel the rejection. My family stood there in their polished world, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for the begging to start. They saw a struggling single mother they could finally discard. They didn't see the lawyer in me, calculating the interest. They didn't know that while they were ending my residency, I was about to end their entire lifestyle. As a lawyer, I deal in facts, and the fact was, this house didn't belong to them. It belonged to my signature and my salary. That one text I sent, it was the sound of their floor falling out from under them. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they were about to learn that you can't kick the foundation out of a house and expect the roof to stay up. I walked up the sweeping mahogany staircase of the Savannah mansion, my heels clicking a rhythm of cold, lethal precision against the wood. 2 years ago, I had crawled back to this house after my divorce from Trevor, looking for a sanctuary to rebuild my life with Sophie. I thought this mansion was a family safety net. I didn't realize it was a predatory trap designed to harvest my success. I didn't head for the closet to grab a suitcase. I didn't pull down the bins for Sophie's toys. Instead, I went straight to my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't rub my eyes trying to summon regret. There was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a balance sheet. The screen's glow was the only light in the room, illuminating a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. For 3 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for a lifestyle they couldn't afford on their own. I had been the foundation, and they had mistaken my stability for a doormat. I logged into the portal for the mortgage servicer. I watched the cursor blink, as patient as I had been for the last 3 years. My parents, Patricia and Gregory, had begged me to co-sign when their credit score was a graveyard of bad decisions. They needed my $120,000 salary to secure this $1,500,000 dream. At the time, they called it a family legacy. Now, it was just a liability I was ready to liquidate. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I extracted the digital records of every single $4,500 monthly payment I had made since moving back. I downloaded the original contract, my name bolded alongside theirs. Then, I drafted an email to the bank's legal department, carbon copying my own attorney. It was a formal notice of my intent to initiate a partition action, a legal forced sale of the property. I felt a strange sense of liberation as I clicked attach on the evidence of my contributions. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and tonight, I was closing the account. I wasn't just moving out, I was withdrawing the oxygen from the room. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the send button for the text I had drafted to my mother. I didn't write a paragraph explaining my hurt. I didn't mention Sophie's tears. I kept it transactional. Just so we are clear, I have officially notified the bank. Since I no longer live there, I have ceased all mortgage contributions, effective immediately. Furthermore, the partition action I quietly filed weeks ago has been granted. A court-ordered sale is now inevitable to recover my equity. Good luck trying to refinance a foreclosing property without my income. I hit send at precisely 12:03 a.m. The conflict had started at 11:51 p.m., 12 minutes to dismantle a 3-year-old lie. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Outside, the Georgia humidity was still thick, but inside my room, the air had finally become clear. They weren't shocked by what they'd done to me. They were about to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. I stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling Savannah garden that my money had maintained for years. For 3 years, I had been the silent foundation of this estate, the invisible pillar holding up a roof that was now trying to collapse on me. They called this mansion their dream, but the reality was that it was built on my exhaustion and my $120,000 salary. My parents, Patricia and Gregory, hadn't just asked me to move back 2 years ago to help me. They had invited me back to ensure their $1,500,000 investment didn't end up in a foreclosure auction. When they first approached me to co-sign the mortgage, they didn't come as parents. They came as supplicants. Their credit was a wreck, a graveyard of bad investments and status-seeking debt. They needed my income and my clean financial record to qualify. We're family, destiny, they had whispered. We help each other. This is for all of us. I believed them. I signed those papers and tied my financial future to their vanity. That was the start of the invisible chains. It's a specific kind of psychological trap, survivor's guilt weaponized by the very people who are supposed to be your sanctuary. Because I was a successful lawyer, because I had worked hard to earn my position, they made me feel like my success was a family asset. They used the family debt narrative to keep me compliant, making me feel that paying their bills was the only way to prove I wasn't selfish or ungrateful. It was an emotional tax I paid every single month, a subscription to a family that only valued me as long as the check cleared. Every 30 days, I wired $4,500 to the bank. In 3 years, that totaled $162,000 of my hard-earned money poured into a house I didn't even own a majority share of. And yet, they treated me like a burden. They looked at Sophie and saw a nuisance instead of their granddaughter. They looked at my room and saw potential real estate for my brother's whims. I had been the silent investor in their version of family. But tonight, the audit was over, and I was declaring them bankrupt. The chains were gone, and the foundation they had taken for granted was about to be pulled out from under their feet. I didn't hear a knock. Jackson and Claire just walked in, their faces tight with a brand of entitlement that only people living on someone else's dime can possess. Jackson stood by the door, arms crossed, trying to look like the head of a household he didn't pay for. Claire was draped in a silk robe, her designer bracelets clinking $3,000 accessories, probably bought on a credit card I'd eventually be asked to help pay off. You need to stop this tantrum, Destiny, Jackson said, his voice dripping with forced authority. Mom told us about your text. It's pathetic. You're really going to try and ruin the family over a room? I didn't look up from my laptop. It isn't a room, Jackson. It's $1 million liability. And I'm not ruining the family. I'm simply withdrawing my sponsorship. Claire let out a sharp, jagged laugh. Your sponsorship? God, you are so dramatic. We need this suite. My followers are expecting a higher level of production value. We're turning this space into a professional live stream studio. It's an investment in a career that actually has a future. I finally looked at her. A future? You have 50,000 followers and $0 in a savings account. I have a law degree, and I'm currently the only person keeping the lights on in this studio you're so excited about. Your degree is useless if you use it to attack your own blood, Jackson snapped. You think you're better than us because you spend your day looking at fine print? You're just a glorified paper pusher who can't handle the fact that we're moving on without you. They were trapped in an empty wallet power illusion. It's a psychological phenomenon where people who have become dependent on a certain lifestyle begin to believe that the lifestyle itself grants them power. They thought the marble floors and the Savannah address made them untouchable. They didn't realize that status is a rental, and the lease was officially up. They were acting like shareholders, while I held all the stock. To them, my education was a threat to their harmony, because it gave me the one thing they lacked, a way out. You're ruining the family legacy, Claire added, her eyes narrowing. You're being spiteful because Trevor left you, and you have nothing else to control. I'm not controlling anything, I said, my voice clinical and quiet. I'm just stopping the overdraft. My compassion has been a luxury you've been consuming for 3 years, but the credit limit has been reached. You wanted me out of this house? You got it. But you don't get to keep the house if you don't have the person paying for it. That isn't spite, it's accounting. Jackson stepped toward me, his face red. We'll see what the bank says when Dad tells them you're trying to sabotage a family home. The bank doesn't care about Dad's feelings, Jackson, I said as I stood up. They care about the $4,500 that won't be in the account on the first of the month. Good luck explaining your live stream studio to the foreclosure department. I walked out of that Savannah mansion without a single tear, leaving the jasmine-scented rot behind me and heading straight for the city. Sophie was asleep in the back seat, finally safe from the suffocating tension of a home that was never truly ours. I didn't head to a hotel. I headed to the one place where I knew the truth was waiting in black and white, the office of an old law school friend who specialized in real estate fraud. Marcus was waiting for me, 2 cups of cold coffee on his desk, and a stack of records that already looked like a roadmap of betrayal. For years, I'd been the silent investor in my parents' version of family. But as we began to dig, I realized that my investment had been harvested without my consent. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon even a flicker of regret for leaving, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a criminal audit. It didn't take long for Marcus to find the first red flag. Destiny. When was the last time you received a physical statement from your primary mortgage account? He asked, his eyes never leaving the screen. I thought about it. I haven't seen one in months. I assumed everything went paperless. It didn't, Marcus said, his voice flat and clinical. Someone filed an address change request for all your financial mail 6 months ago. It was all diverted to a P.O. box on the other side of town. The realization hit me harder than the eviction notice. My parents hadn't just been ungrateful. They had been tactical. They were intercepting and destroying my mail to hide the ballooning debt they were piling onto my credit. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and now I could see exactly how much they had stolen. Every late notice I never saw, every credit inquiry I didn't authorize, it was a systematic execution of my financial future. I realized then how they had bypassed my scrutiny. They had convinced me to share my digital tax credentials under the guise of helping me during my 80-hour work weeks. They were intercepting my electronic tax statements and credit alerts before I ever logged in, keeping me blind while they bled me dry. Now I realized our relationship had been a subscription, with me footing the bill while they manipulated the fine print. They weren't protecting a family legacy. They were protecting a paper trail of treachery. I wasn't a daughter to them anymore. I was a credit limit they intended to reach. Marcus tapped a new document on his screen, his expression shifting from professional concern to genuine shock. Destiny, you need to see this. The diverted mail was just the beginning. Marcus leaned back, his face a mask of professional disbelief. He turned the monitor toward me and zoomed in on a document from 6 months ago. It was an application for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. The amount was for exactly $100,000. My eyes went straight to the bottom of the page. There it was. My digital signature. It wasn't just a crude scribble. They had accessed my laptop while I was exhausted from work, using my saved credentials to authorize the e-sign. As a lawyer, I knew the security protocols they had bypassed. This was a calculated identity theft. I never authorized this loan, Marcus. My voice was so steady, it felt like ice. I didn't feel my heart racing. I didn't feel the urge to scream. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I was looking at a felony committed by the people who had just told me I wasn't part of the family anymore. Look at the transfer history, Marcus whispered. We followed the trail. The $100,000 hadn't gone toward the mortgage or the mansion's upkeep. It had been funneled through a series of accounts until it landed in a business fund for Savannah Drafts, the architect's startup Jackson had been trying to launch for 2 years. Jackson had failed 3 times before. He was a visionary without a portfolio, an entrepreneur with no revenue, and my parents had funded his 4th failure by stealing my credit. They didn't just want me to move out so they could have a live stream studio. They had already harvested my financial future to feed their golden boy's ego. In their traditional, distorted view of family, Jackson was the heir who deserved the world, while I was simply the daughter expected to build it for him. They were willing to sacrifice my daughter's stability for his delusions, because to them, a son's pride always outweighed a daughter's survival. My parents didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a high-yield asset to be liquidated for their favorite son. My compassion hadn't just been a luxury. It had been a blind spot they used to commit a crime. They were banking on my silence, on my sense of family duty, to keep me from ever looking at the fine print. I thought about the times Patricia had looked at Sophie with that thinly veiled annoyance while I was paying for her dinner. I thought about Gregory staring at the floor while I was being evicted. They were hiding the shame of their theft behind a wall of manufactured indignation. They had convinced themselves that I owed them this because I was the successful one. It was a twisted logic where my hard work justified their crime. I was no longer the silent investor in their version of family. I was the primary witness in a criminal investigation. I rubbed my eyes, and for a second, I tried to summon regret. But there was only clarity. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a balance sheet, and it was time to settle the score. "Print it all out, Marcus," I said. "The diverted mail, the forged HELOC, the transfer records to Jackson's business. All of it. What are you going to do, Destiny?" I looked at the stack of papers, the physical evidence of a love that had turned into a transaction I never authorized. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. And my parents were about to find out exactly what happens when you default on a debt you can never repay. The door to my new office opened at precisely 10 in the morning. I didn't need to check the calendar to know who it was. The sound of frantic, uneven footsteps told me everything I needed to know. Patricia and Gregory walked in, but they didn't look like the monarchs of a Savannah mansion anymore. They looked small. They looked diminished. My mother's eyes were bloodshot and swollen, her expensive silk scarf tied haphazardly, as if she had lost the ability to care about the very status she once used to crush me. I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't offer them coffee. I sat behind my desk, my posture a reflection of the legal walls I had built around myself over the last 72 hours. Gregory stood by the door, his hands trembling as he clutched a crumpled manila envelope. The air didn't smell like jasmine here. It smelled like paper, ink, and the cold reality of a closing account. "Destiny, please," my mother whispered, her voice cracking. "The bank." They sent the final notice of sale. They denied the refinance because of the missed payments over the last few months. They said, "Without your income and your clean credit, the debt is a total loss. We've reached the end of the redemption period. We have only 30 days before the sheriff puts the house on the auction block." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the familiar tug of daughterly guilt. I didn't feel the weight of the invisible chains they had used to keep me paying for their vanity. I simply looked at the clock. "You should have thought about the math before you issued my eviction notice," I said. My voice was clinical, a flat line on a heart monitor. "We were hasty. We told you that," Gregory stammered, stepping forward. "We can fix this. If you just come back, if you sign the new terms, we can save the family honor, Jackson. His business is just starting to find its feet. If we lose the house, he loses his office, his future. Do this for your brother." I let out a short, jagged laugh that didn't reach my eyes. Jenda's future was bought with my credit, wasn't it? I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the stack of documents Marcus had printed. I slid them across the mahogany surface, the evidence of the diverted mail, the forged signatures, and the $100,000 theft they had dressed up as a family loan. My mother reached for the papers, her eyes scanning the forged signatures. The color drained from her face until she was the same shade as the foreclosure notice in Gregory's hand. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Destiny. We were going to pay it back. We just needed a little more time. You didn't need time, I said, leaning forward. You needed a victim. You thought my love was a contract with no expiration date, a subscription where you could keep hitting renew on my credit line without me ever noticing. But I've canceled the service. I pulled a final document from the folder, a copy of the police report I had filed an hour earlier for identity theft and forgery. Patricia collapsed into the guest chair, the reality of the felony charge finally hitting her. How could you do this to your own family? She sobbed. I looked at her, then at Gregory, then finally at the photo of Sophie on my desk. I already did something for the family, I said, my voice lethal and quiet. I stopped being your victim. Now, I suggest you find a good criminal lawyer. You're going to need one more than you need that house. I went back to my computer, the glow of the screen reflecting a different kind of sunrise, one they would never see. The Savannah mansion went to the auction block less than 2 months later. I watched the listing from my new office, tracking the numbers with the same cold, clinical detachment I used to audit their forged loans. It sold for $300,000 less than what they owed. A final, public testament to the dream that was never actually theirs. Patricia and Gregory were forced into a cramped 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of town, far from the jasmine-scented streets and the marble foyer. Jackson and Claire, they vanished within 48 hours of the power being cut. Turns out their family loyalty was just a promotional trial that expired the second the luxury was gone. I stood in the middle of our new sanctuary, my feet planted on warm hardwood floors that were secured by a signature I actually authorized. The sun was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in 3 years, the air didn't feel heavy with the humidity of someone else's greed. Sophie was sitting on a drop cloth in her new room, a smudge of lavender mist paint on her cheek, and a wide, gummy grin on her face. We were painting the walls pink and purple, just like she had asked. Every brushstroke felt like a small revolution against a past that had tried to write me out of my own story. Some people might look at what I did and call it revenge. But as I watched my daughter laugh, I realized this wasn't revenge, it was sower's justice. Traditional justice is obsessed with punishment. It's about looking at the wreckage and tallying the cost. But the justice of a sower is about what you do with the cleared ground. I didn't win because I broke them. I won because I reclaimed the resources they were harvesting and used them to plant a foundation that actually holds weight. I used the recovered equity and the settlement from the bank to establish a legal clinic for single mothers facing the same financial exploitation I survived. My victory wasn't their downfall. It was the life I created after I stopped carrying them. If you are listening to this, and you are the one who has always been made to feel like a guest in your own life, this letter is for you. You might feel like your worth is tied to how much you can endure, or how many forged expectations you can satisfy to keep the peace. But loyalty to people who only value you as a resource isn't a virtue, it's a subscription you need to cancel. You are allowed to be the architect of your own sanctuary. You are allowed to take your signature off the contracts that are designed to bankrupt your soul. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and let the toxic structures collapse under their own weight. That night, I tucked Sophie into her new bed. The room didn't smell like jasmine or humidity. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I went to my own room, opened my laptop one last time, and looked at the closed file on the Savannah mansion. I didn't feel a flicker of regret. I simply archived the digital file into a secure vault. It was no longer a wound I had to tend to, just a closed chapter of evidence I would never need to open again. For the first time in years, I slept through till morning. No guilt, no noise, just the quiet realization that I was finally home. If this story gave you the strength to see your own worth, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with one person who needs to know they aren't alone. You are the architect of your own peace.